Welcome to one more edition of Politics Done Right. Today we have an interesting show. While one may believe it doesn't cover the topics that we normally cover, let me tell you that this is going to be one wonderful interview. First of all, with us we have Riane Eisler. I hope I said the name correctly. Welcome aboard Politics Done Right.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Egberto.
Well, first, let me tell you, Riane Eisler is a PhD, a JD, is president of the Center for Partnership Studies, CPS, editor-in-chief of the Interdisciplinary Journal of Partnership Studies at the University of Minnesota, and internationally known as author of The Chalice and Blade, Our History, Our Future, now in 57 U.S. printings and 27 foreign editions. What a task. And other books. Her The Real Wealth of Nations, Creating a Caring Economics, was hailed by Nobel Peace Laureate Archbishop Desmond Tutu as a template for the better world we have been so urgently seeking. Her recent book, Nurturing Our Humanity, which is the main topic of discussion here, how domination and partnership shape our brains, lives, and future, which she co-authored with anthropologist Douglas Fry from Oxford University Press in 2019, combines her research with the latest findings from the social and biological sciences, especially neuroscience. Riane Eisler, welcome aboard Politics Done Right. Thank you for being with us.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Egberto.
First of all, in scanning your book, the first thing that kind of popped out to me is your early beginnings on a boat on the coast of Cuba. Why don't you tell me a little bit about that? That's a history that many Americans don't understand. We've had this sort of history of not only immigrants, but of those that are coming over here out of need for a long time. Why don't you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, I think I empathize a great deal with people who are coming here out of need, with refugees, because I was, with my parents, a child refugee from Nazi Europe. So I go way back. And we escaped the Holocaust really by a hair's breadth. And we were able to be on one of the last ships before one that was turned back from Cuba, before the St. Louis, to be admitted. And really that saved our lives, being able to, but it was also, of course, very traumatic. And growing up in the industrial slums of Havana in the Batista days, you know, where the gaps between haves and have-nots were horrendous.
Right.
That was another lesson in trauma and in injustice, really, for me. So all of that led me actually to my research, to answer some questions that really I articulated later on more precisely, but questions that, well, I know you've asked, does it have to be this way? Does there have to be so much cruelty, insensitivity, violence? And if not, what are the alternatives? And my research says that yes, there is an alternative, but to see it, we have to get out of our conventional way of thinking.
And that is what I love of what I saw. I mean, you have this thing that you called the systemic and macroscopic views. Why don't you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, when I started my research, it became very clear. Well, even before that, you know, I realized that in all my years of higher education, quote unquote, there had been hardly anything in what I was taught about, you know, by, for, and about people like me, women.
Right.
Nor was there hardly anything about children. I mean, the majority of humanity has been left out of conventional studies of society. That's big.
Why is that?
Well, because look, if you don't see the whole picture, I mean, from a systems standpoint, obviously, well, you can't see the various parts of the picture. You cannot connect the dots. And that's what my work is about. what it shows is really something that once articulated, of course, it's self-evident, that yes, there is a connection between how a culture constructs our most primary human relations, childhood and gender, and also how it constructs politics and economics and everything else.
Now,
But
so
you can't see that if you leave out a whole huge part of the picture, right?
exactly, and to me, that is the essence of this book. All through it, I can tell you that in when I started reading, the concept of selfishness came out, and your first writings about it scared me because I have this concept that inherent to human beings, most people, and not all, most people are inherently good. And moreover, I have this concept that I preach all of the times that, given many externalities, people change, people are different. And what I noticed at first when I started reading the book, it seemed like somebody talked about, and by the way, I'm not an anthropologist, I'm an engineer. I am not a historian, I'm an engineer. So what I looked at in the book is I saw that somebody mentioned a selfish gene. And as soon as I saw that, it was worrisome. So first of all, tell me a little bit about this supposed selfish gene that really may be non-existent.
Well, it's really non-existent, probably, because it's so interesting. We make the comparison in the book between the belief that, storm gods, or evil spirits or whatever, and now it's a selfish gene. It's the same story,
Right.
right? We don't have agency. We are controlled but I don't know how you got this idea because the book really debunks with
Yes.
evidence from neuroscience, from both the social and biological sciences.
That is what happens when
This
you
idea.
start scanning. When you start scanning and you first see, you start scanning a book because I have to read a lot of books. You start scanning a book and you go ahead and you see selfish gene, and then you see this particular scientist speaks about it, and the heart sink because it's like, oh, it must be true. But I'm going to ask in a particular question about that. But tell me a little bit more about how you debunked it.
Well, it is really debunked in this book on many, many counts. One, this book combines my research on what I call the partnership and domination systems, which do include what happens at the status of the majority of humanity, women and children, with new findings from neuroscience, and it also debunks. Well, all right, let me answer your question here. It debunks it on the basis of neuroscience, for one thing, because what we're learning is if there's a default for human behavior, it is not the so-called original sin or the evolutionary imperative that, too bad, rape, war, it's, we may not like it, but that's in our genes, right?
Right.
Absolutely not. What we know from neuroscience is that people's pleasure centers, parts of our brains,
Mm-hmm.
I won't use the technical language, it's not necessary, light up more when we share, when we give,
Mm-hmm.
and when we win. But there's also, it's debunked on many counts. I've been working on this book now for 10 years. It takes me a long time to write my books. But 4 years ago, I invited the anthropologist Douglas Fry to join me as a co-author. He has a lot of expertise in neuroscience too, but he's probably one of the world's authorities on foraging societies. And guess what? Foraging is how we humans and pre-humans, hominids, lived for millennia,
Exactly.
not just for a few hundred or thousand years. And he calls them the original partnership societies. Why? Because they're more egalitarian, they're gender balanced, so there's also equal valuing of women and men. And with this more valuing of the so-called, in domination systems, the so-called feminine, caring, caregiving, nonviolence, which men, ooh, right? I mean, real men can't be like women, right?
Learned behavior, right?
Right. Learned behavior, indoctrinated in boys from birth practically, and in girls too, because this is not women against men or men
Right.
against women. It's a system. And of course, they were peaceful. So the whole story we've been told, continue to be told. But it's no wonder, because out of 1600 years of so-called modern science, Western science, only 50 years ago did we have women's studies, men's studies, gender studies, African American studies. And as for child development, it's still siloed. It's someplace tucked away. It should be part of sociology, anthropology, political science, economics, because I'm just going on here with
No, no, no,
you.
no. I want to hear. Let me look, Rian. Let me tell you why I wanted to do this interview. The fact of the matter is, we are in trouble as a country right now, from an
As
ideological standpoint. And I wanted somebody that knew a hell of a lot more than I did. There are certain things that I get by inferring, and reading your book made many of those inferences. Thank you. Although it scared me a couple of times, but reading it gave me a good feeling about the inferences. I think it's the type of book that everybody should read, because what happens is it doesn't give you hope. It gives you resolve. In other words, it tells you these are the way things really are. These are the things what ideology has imposed on you. These are the things that we then can change. Because what your book says, in effect, is that these things are not predetermined. These things can all be changed because they're just based on. Go ahead.
I love what you said about resolve. I sometimes say it gives you grounded hope, but I like resolve much better, because we can do it. But if you remember, the book ends with 4 cornerstones,
Mm-hmm.
and they're not your conventional political cornerstones at all. But in 2007, I wrote an op-ed saying, let's learn something from what the people pushing us back to what I call the domination system, the so-called rightist fundamentalist alliance in the United States. And it's also a corporate alliance, of course. But they have shifted the normative ideal for family
Mm-hmm.
way back to a domination point, where what I found, a survey that asked people, is the father the master
Right.
of the house? The percentage of people increased, because why? The rightist fundamentalist alliance first came together to defeat a, quote, women's issue. It's very interesting. The Equal Rights Amendment. People don't realize this at all. And they have focused, and it's not just they who focus on a, quote, traditional family, which is a code, isn't it?
Yes.
For authoritarian, rigidly male-dominated, highly punitive family. So does Khomeini in Iran, so does ISIS. But there are reasons for that. They get it, that it is, all right, they may not know the neuroscience, okay? But they do know in their gut what neuroscience shows, that what children experience and observe in their early years impacts nothing less than how our brains develop, and hence how we feel, think, and act, including how we vote, by the way.
Right. You just said something that's interesting. You said they may not know neuroscience, they may not know any of that stuff, but they do know what they know. And it's funny, because from most from most engineering backgrounds, you don't necessarily have to know the details of why things work. We can go to a scientist and get things and then just operate on that notion. And that is what the dictators and that is what the fascists and that's what they all do. They don't necessarily know the science behind what they're doing, but they actually know how to get it done. Now, I'm glad that you brought up the domination, how in your book you mentioned about, because a lot of people think that different people are predisposed to be a certain way. What your book note is that externalities, environment, how you were brought up has a hell of a lot to do with your outcomes, a hell of a lot to do with your method of thinking, a hell of a lot to do with how your brains are wired. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I think this should be sort of taught to us, but it hasn't been. And this is why I write the books I do. We are not born with fully developed brains.
Mm-hmm.
Our brain actually develops in interaction with our environments. For humans, that is primarily our cultural environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
As needed by family, very, very important, education, religion, politics, economics. So if you grow up in this, quote, traditional family, highly, it's a code, highly authoritarian, rigidly male-dominated, highly punitive family, what do children learn before their brains are fully formed, much less their critical faculties? That comes much later. They learn two lessons that are fundamental to maintaining and imposing domination systems. One is they learn to equate difference, beginning with the difference in form in our species between male and female, with either superiority or inferiority, dominating or being dominated, served or serving. So they have a template for in-group versus out-group thinking. And it isn't just the racism in the United States. In the Middle East, it's Shia versus Sunni, Sunni versus Shia. Do you see what I'm saying? I mean,
oh, yes.
this is not only a question of the United States, this is a global issue. But they also learn, and then, they just, the two go together. But the other lesson they learn, and this is fundamental for authoritarian domination regimes, now political regimes, they learn that it's very painful to not obey orders, no matter how bizarre, much less unjust they are. And they learn because they're dependent on the very people who really are punitive or causing them pain, to love them. And so they will love the, quote, strong man who promises, you see where this all goes?
Yes.
This is not isolated. We have to understand the system's dynamics. If we're going to keep having regressions because we've been going forward, compared to the European Middle Ages, I sometimes say it as a joke that when I get depressed, I think of the European Middle Ages. They look like the Taliban,
Right.
the Inquisition, Crusades, the witch burnings, women and children, forget it. Nobody had any rights. I mean, St. Augustine put it very succinctly. He said, for anyone to question their status in life, it's like a nose wanting to be an eye. Bam. Right?
Yes.
But we have moved forward, but we've had all these regressions, and they have not coincidentally. We have to really connect the dots, and to connect them, we have to see them, right?
Right.
Not coincidentally, whether it was Hitler in Germany or Khomeini in Iran, very different, right? They were based always. I mean, why did Khomeini say that the chador, which is a symbol of women's, really, I mean, it can be interpreted many ways, but it is blackness,
right.
Evil. It is all the same system, different, it can be religious, it can be secular, it can be Eastern, it can be Western, it can be socialist. Stalin, oh boy, did he go back from a more egalitarian family? Big time.
Right.
And so this is what my work has been about.
Well,
And I'm so glad that you just seem to get it so completely. I love that.
Well, I mean, I think look, you see, I am of the thought that a lot of what we do, I mean, here in the type of politics that I practice, I'm very left wing, but the type of politics that I practice is one that is very inclusive. In other words, I want to hear from everybody because I think it's from everybody that we actually come out with things. And again, that is a democratic way to do things. Um, but to be that way requires uh, the kind of psychological or the kind of psychological understanding that you are putting forth in your book, which is one of the reasons I'm telling people you should get this book because it's not about helping those of us who are already willing to go ahead and learn this stuff. It's about being able to address others when they come with certain things that they would never have had an inclination to have this discussion that we're having now. You give us the tools that we can use on with these people outside the fold and then be able to change en masse to bring people in.
It's more than that. I mean, and I agree with you,
Right.
obviously. If we don't build the foundations, you wouldn't build a house without building solid foundations.
Exactly.
And we have, over the last 3 centuries, because of the Industrial Revolution destabilizing everything, one progressive social movement after another has challenged traditions of domination.
Mm-hmm.
The so-called divinely ordained right of kings to rule, divinely ordained right of men to rule over women and children, divinely ordained right of a quote superior race to rule over inferior one, all the way to the environmental movement, challenging man's once hallowed conquest of nature, which at our level of technology is about to do us in.
Exactly.
But they have really paid mostly attention to dismantling the top of the domination pyramid.
Mm.
Politics and economics as conventionally defined. And I emphasize as conventionally defined
Please
because,
say more. Please say more.
okay, and they have not paid sufficient attention to shifting from domination to partnership in these 4 cornerstones: childhood. I mean, thank goodness the American Psychological Association finally recently said not only is spanking, uh, you know, inefficient,
Mm-hmm.
but it is harmful. But they don't get the whole connection. It's harmful because what do children learn? They learn that it is fine, it is acceptable, it is moral to use violence to impose your will on others. I mean, let's think in systems terms a little here.
Mm-hmm.
Gender, why? Because when you split humanity the way that domination stereotypes, gender stereotypes, which we're challenging, which is good news. Again, I mean, there's movement towards partnership, but it's in such bits and pieces, and this work gives a frame. But look, what are men are taught, as I said, you can't be like a woman, not a real man.
Right.
So what does that mean? It's caring, caregiving, nonviolence, right? So
Absolutely.
with women, so men are left with, they get emotions, they get contempt and anger, period. I mean, it's weird. And women are disempowered. It's crazy. I mean, if a woman is assertive, she's a she's a ball breaker, right?
Mm.
I mean, we're so distorted.
Right.
But value system, in my book on economics, The Real Wealth of Nations, I show the gendered system of values. That if you really think about it, why is there always enough money for prisons? Well, it's the old domination gender stereotype of the punitive father, isn't it?
Yes. We are going to have to bring you on to discuss that other book that I hadn't known about because we talk a whole lot about economics here. So I'm going to have to get
Okay.
that book and bring you back onto that. But we only have a few minutes, and what I want to talk about now is current day American politics.
Okay.
Okay. Um, I would like to know from you, what is your suggestion? How do progressives, and I'm assuming when I say progressives, I mean folks who want to move the nation forward in every aspect, economics, gender, in every aspect. How can we inculcate within the minds of people that these are not just crazy left-wing ideas, but these are the real human ideas. These are the real things that brings out our humanity.
Well, I think that understanding that actually, as I said, the default for our species is caring and sharing. We're capable of cruelty, violence, or we wouldn't see it, is a first step. The stories, I said 4 cornerstones. One of the cornerstones is stories and language. Another one is economics, but as defined differently, caring economics. If we understand that the stories we have been told are simply not true, the stories about, quote, human nature, that is very important. And for us as progressives, left is not going to solve it. Look at what happened in the former Soviet Union and in China. The real struggle for our future is between the configuration of a domination system, which is this authoritarian top-down system in both the family and the state or tribe, rigid gender stereotypes, a gendered system of values, the ranking of one half of humanity over the other, and of course, high level of abuse and violence. How in the world do you maintain, whether it's under Stalin or Kim Jong-un on the left, right, or whether it's Hitler or the world, look, what's happening in the world today, what's happening in the United States today politically is a classic example of regression to the domination side of the social scale, because it's always a matter of degree, okay? That the American public elected a, quote, strong man who promised that he would take care of everything and who incited in-group versus out-group thinking, who really the way that he despises women and the so-called soft or feminine, it's classic domination, regression. But it's not only happening in the United States. So-called religious fundamentalism, whether it's here or whether it's in the Middle East, same thing. It's really domination fundamentalism, okay? So what we need to do, first of all, is to change our thinking, to understand that we have to have a systemic view and that we will continue to have regressions unless we pay attention to the matters that we have been taught are not important. Childhood, gender, and economics, the gendered system of values that informs economics, wow. It's big, but we haven't been conscious of it. And I know it's hard for people to come out of their comfort zones, but it is progressives. Once we understand that we're talking about a systemic shift, as you do, I love your systems thinking. As an engineer, you've been taught, haven't you?
Absolutely.
Let's apply that, for goodness sakes, to society. And it's very interesting. Regressives recognize the importance of what happens with women and children. For many progressives, sexism is not good, but this is a women's issue. And as for children, well, yeah, that's, we'd like to, but that's the children's issue. We are going to talk about the important things, right? Nonsense. These are important things, and they're directly, as I said about Trump, directly related to the kind of political system and the kind of economic system we have. So I'm so glad to talk with you, Egberto, and to continue our conversation, because this is fundamental. If we can lay the foundations if we change our thinking and stop fighting with each other, for goodness sakes. I mean, this is how domination systems also maintain themselves, fragmenting not only our consciousness so that we think that the majority of humanity doesn't count, but fragmenting us into environmentalists and social justice, economic justice. It's all movement towards the partnership system.
Divide and conquer.
Absolutely.
Riane Eisler, PhD, president of the Center for Partnership Studies and author of Nurturing Our Humanity. Thank you so kindly for having been with Politics Done Right. We will meet again for that book on economics, and you have a wonderful rest of your day.
And you too, Edberto. And next time we'll talk about the new metrics that we have developed, because that is vital. How do we measure what we value, what we really value?
Thank you so kindly, Riane.